way, all the way. All the way, push.
Serving my role as a head coach and also doubling up as the ProCyclingSG general manager.
Been with Mitchelton Scott as a performance coach and a sports director, first with the Continental team, which was Mitchelton Bike Exchange.
My name is Jia Yan and I am from Deloitte Southeast Asia Sports Business Group.
After sharing how you build up your fitness, I think the challenge now comes to how long can you prolong it. This is where we will share with you all our practices.
How you can progress your training and lift your level and improve.
Useful tips for amateur riders themselves, even for athletes of different sports. This is an important aspect to take note. Hi everyone, welcome to the second episode of ProCyclingSG's live stream, where we will be sharing with you the latest best practices and tips on cycling. My name is Jia Yan and I am from Deloitte Singapore Sports Business Group. If you have watched our first episode, you'll know the two speakers that are joining on this live stream today, and they are Adrian and Andrew. So for the benefit of the viewers who didn't watch the first episode, allow me to introduce them again. So firstly, we have Adrian Ng, General Manager of ProCyclingSG, who's also the former head coach of our national team. And secondly, we have Andrew Smith, Sports Director and Performance Coach of Mitchelton Scott Pro Cycling Team at Greenwich Cycling. Hi Adrian, hi Andrew.
Hello.
Hi everyone.
Good to have the both of you again today. So in the previous episode, we shared a lot on basic safety tips. And for today, based on the title of this episode, Progressive Training, which I infer we would be touching on how you can advance from one level to another in terms of performance and training. Am I right to say that?
Yeah, exactly. So we need to, it's all about progressing your training and lifting your level and getting stronger. That's what we're going to talk about today. And before we go into the details, there's a few things we need to understand, and we need to make the riders and the listeners out there understand. And the first of those things is that we need to manipulate and change the intensity that we train at, and also the volume, and that combined makes up our training load. So the first thing that we're going to look at today is we're going to look at different ways that we can measure intensity, which is obviously really important, because you can only do and manipulate something if you know it and you can measure it. So that's the first important thing. So we're going to look at different ways to do that, regardless of whether you're a advanced rider, when we're going to speak about power training and FTP, which Adrian is going to do. But we'll also look at different ways that are a little bit more less advanced and more basic. So the first way that we can explain this is really basic. Way to measure your intensity is the rating of perceived exertion. So that's just a subjective measure of actually how you are feeling, and that's a rating of 1 out of 10. And that's very subjective. It can change from day to day. So it's not that accurate. But if you're on a budget, you just started riding, that's a good way to start measuring your intensity. The next way is something that many riders and people out there might know about, might have access to. It's more advanced, and that's heart rate. So obviously your heart rate determines how hard you are going, what your intensity is. So that's really important. That's a different way that we can measure our intensity. And we're going to give you a little bit of a tool and a little bit of a way to determine different training zones with heart rate, with power, with the rating of perceived exertion. And then obviously we need to remember that heart rate is a physiological response. So it's actually what your body is experiencing. And then the last one is power training or wattage, which is it's a physical output, and it's probably the most valuable way to measure your intensity and also measure your progression at this moment in time.
Nice. All right. So to the viewers watching us right now, if you have any questions on what we are going to cover today, feel free to drop them in the comments below, and we'll get to that at the end of the session. So back to your point on progressing in training, just wondering, how do cyclists normally measure their training intensity? Or rather, what is the common unit of measurement used to assess your training intensity?
So thank you, Jiayan. So one of the most common way we actually define cycling fitness is what we call the FTP. Basically, it stands for functional threshold power. So what it means is that it's basically a min-max power of 60 minutes, means an effort you can roughly hold for close to 60 minutes. So the usual recommendation for calculating the FTP is to do a 20-minute test. So after you finish your 20-minute test, you take your average power and you divide by 95%. So with why 95%? Because if it's a full 100%, you are looking at close to an hour of an effort. So if we use 95%, we kind of have a ballpark figure of for 20 minutes to actually roughly estimate what 60 minutes will be. So it's a bit hard to ask somebody to do a 60 minutes all out effort, right? So 20 minutes is more doable. So that's where the 20 minutes protocol comes in. Well, the result will give you a glimpse of your general fitness conditioning, and also you can use it as a benchmark, to know whether you are fit or and whether how much work you need to do it. But as I say, this guideline, basically it's just a benchmark, but most importantly is to enjoy the process and to have fun and not being stressed over this number, Yeah, but it's good to know what is the target.
I see. No, just want to clarify, how can I measure my FTP? Do I probably need a meter or something?
Yes. So actually you need a power meter, basically a device that actually can read your power reading. Normally, you have it's in the crank, or you can have the pedal power meter. So basically it measures how much force you put onto the pedal stroke. So there are a couple of ways that you can actually measure your 20-minute effort, and you can actually record it into your bicycle computer. So you need a power meter, and then you need a bicycle computer. So you need these two components to actually record, that whole entire duration. So as I say, one of the simplest way of calculating is to time yourself for 20 minutes, and remember to press the lap button so that it records the entire 20-minute duration.
I see. So just wondering, you mentioned 20 minutes. Is there any other sort of protocol, maybe shorter than 20 minutes, I guess, is to record your FTP then?
Yeah, Jayan, there's a lot of methods to measure your FTP, or functional threshold power. I think it all depends on your personal context and why you want to measure that. So I think first of all, we need to ask ourselves that if you're a beginner, is it really a relevant parameter to measure? And do we really need to measure FTP? And do you really need to train with power? So like we've said before, we have heart rate, we have different ways that we can measure intensity, and it's quite an expensive way to measure your intensity and your progression is with a power meter. So it might not be accessible or relevant to everyone. And also thinking about taking power measurements, it's it's something that you need to do in the same way every time. So as I said, out on the internet, if you go and do a search, or you go and look in the literature, you'll see there's various different ways that you can measure your FTP, and it depends on your personal context. So what I've done before is I've used 2 8-minute methods, a method with 2 8-minute sessions instead of a 20-minute, and then I take 90% of the average of the 2 8 minutes instead of 95%, like Adrian said. And why would you do this? This is a method which has been used for a long time, even by a guy called Chris Carmichael. I think he kind of started doing it. And what we need to remember is that power is there's a decline in your power over time, and there's an algorithm that you can use. So there's different time periods that are applicable. But what you need to remember is always use the same test, use the same protocol in the same conditions. Don't compare your FTP to your friends who's using a different method. Don't think that you can do one method today and in 2 months' time use a different method. It's important to make sure that the method you're using is valid and repeatable, and always use the same method. Thinking about heart rate, you can use heart rate to measure your intensity and determine your training zones. And how would you do that? Well, roughly 45 to 60-minute all-out effort. Your average heart rate during that time period would give you more or less your FTP heart rate. And then obviously nowadays we have all sorts of modern technology like the Garmin devices that many of the cyclists use, also gives you a capability to actually measure your FTP or your heart rate, and it actually updates that for you automatically. And then finally, in the Mitchelton Scott team, we have a system called Training Peaks. So I have an example that's going to pop onto the screen, which just shows you different ways that we actually measure intensity, and we measure and determine different parameters. So what you'll see is we have a regression graph of power. We have the same with heart rate, and we have something where we can see different zones where the riders have spent how much time in each intensity zone. And we rarely actually test riders in the professional teams. We actually use data from races and training continuously, and we use that to measure their progression and update their training zones. So yeah, Training Peaks is something that riders can also use out there. They can get us.
Oh, I think we have lost Andrew for a while. Oh yeah, okay. So he was sharing on this Training Peaks dashboard, and I think it's really interesting. I think probably the viewers would find this interesting as well. So maybe we can, while we wait for him to come back online, maybe we can move on to this question that I'm really curious about, and that is, me myself as a beginner cyclist, what would my FTP look like?
Okay, so basically as a beginner, I think you will be somewhere around, I would say 2.0 to about 2.5 watts per kilo. So what I mean by that is after you do your 20 minutes effort, right? You take 95% of it to calculate that 20 minutes duration. And once you got that power, you divide it with your weight. So once you divide it with your weight, it's normally 2 decimal points. So you'll be point something. So if we can flash out the chart, the benchmark for a group, right? So if you just started, right, it will be somewhere around 2.0 to 2.5 watts per kilo. So I think 2.0 to 2.5 is not too bad to start off with. If you are somewhere around 2.5 to 3.0, I would say pretty good. Okay, if you are around 3.0 to 3.5, I would consider you fit. Okay, and then if you are 3.5 to 4.0, I will consider you very fit, and then 4.0 to 4.5 competitive. Now, I would like to make a disclaimer over here. This is taken in Singapore context. Okay, so we can't use this to go overseas and say, because it's a total different ball game overseas. So back locally, what we do is that we collect a huge amount of normative data. This is what we found out locally, guys above our standard. So I think it's good to know so that, when you go out for a group ride, you ask yourself, your friend asks you, come on, you just got a bicycle, come, let's join us on a group ride. You are a bit apprehensive, you're like wondering, oh no, if I go out today, will I get dropped, So this kind of benchmark gives you a bit of a gauge and also helps to build up your confidence so that you know that, what is everybody rough fitness level. So don't take this benchmark literally, but take it as a guide. Okay, it's good to know some guidelines so that it builds up your confidence level. And most importantly, I think as Andrew mentioned before, we need to really enjoy the process and not be too caught up with this numbers game. But as I say, it's still good to know your current fitness situation, so that you don't kill yourself by joining a over fast paced group.
Yay! We have Andrew back.
Hi everyone.
So maybe
I think some gremlins crept into the system there.
Oh, okay. Glad to have you back. So, maybe just to get you up to speed, I was actually asking Adrian a question that, me myself as a beginner cyclist, how would my FTP look like? And he was showing me this chart of this how probably group estimated FTP would look like for oh, I think we lost him again.
Yeah.
Yeah, no worries,
okay.
no worries. Never mind. While we wait
So
for him to come back again, yeah. So yeah, I understand that you were mentioning that this is all more of like a estimate, and it's something that probably
yeah.
due to my own personal interest, context, whether I want to do, competitive training or not, this would be something I will look at if I want to. So
Yeah.
just wondering, to put things into perspective, I remember you have a question from the public in the previous episode on weekly training intensity that, if you have to juggle between your work and your fitness, can you share more in depth on what our training week will look like?
Well, a typical training week, right? Say for example, if you got anywhere between 7 to 10 hours of training, what you really want to do is to, see how you want to spread it out.
Mm,
You you want to make sure that whatever workouts that you do, it's all vary. Meaning your intensity, if it's high, it has to be really high. Okay, and
mm,
if it's easy, it has to be really easy. So I
mm,
think we will touch on that shortly as we go later on, and I will share a bit about the weekly training sessions and some of the intervals that we do in the national team. Andrew also will
mm,
share a bit if he can manage to come back. Okay, he'll share a bit on what they do in Mitchelton Scott. So most importantly is that, as I say, the last sharing is that your hard has to be really hard and your
mm,
easy has to be really easy. So you don't want to reach a point whereby you are at a moderate. So for example, looking at the chart now, right? You want to make
mm,
sure that 70% of the time you are actually doing your easy work. Okay,
mm,
and then on the gray color bar, you are looking at your hard zone. Basically, you want to spend at least 20% to 30% of the time doing hard. And then the
mm,
remainder 10% is you want it to spend the least time, which is in your moderate zone.
mm.
Later on, as we go past, as we share more and more, I will actually share in detail how do we calculate the intensity? How do we know what is hard? How do we
Mm,
know what is moderate? And how do we know what is easy? Yeah,
okay.
and Andrew was sharing about what they do in Mitchelton Scott regards to the Training Peaks dashboard. I think this day and age, right? I think a lot of us are quite tech savvy also, especially those who have been cycling for long. So what this Training Peaks does is that what you need a power meter and you need a cycling computer. So after each ride, it will automatically load up your workout into the main computer system. So what
Mm,
Training Peaks does is that it collates all your data, okay, that you
okay.
do every day, and it does a summary. That's where Andrew shared about the 6 different chart, where there's intensity, there's duration, and there's volume. So there's
Mm,
many types of chart that you can actually do. So Training Peaks allows you to customize your chart as well. So you can
mm.
actually customize what do you want to see.
Now that you
So
now that you say about the charts, I think it's going to be interesting to see since you have prepared about it. So
yeah,
yay, we have Andrew
yes.
back again.
I'm back.
Yay.
So yeah, Adrian
So
speaking
yeah.
about modern technology and how wonderful it is, but sometimes actually it's not that wonderful, and your connection gets cut all the time. So I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, especially when you're working from home, this is the last thing that you probably
Yeah.
want when you
Yeah.
are like working from home. Okay, so just now, Adrian was actually sharing with me on like how a weekly training would look like. He was halfway through, so maybe like, and Adrian, you can continue on that. Like you were mentioning, you had this charts on the various training zones, and just wondering
Yeah.
like how is it?
So what I was sharing was just a continuity of where Andrew stopped. So Andrew, I was sharing to the public about Training Peaks. That this day and age, whatever you do, it can auto load up into the computer system, and the chart actually give you a good summary, of what you have just shared, in terms of volume, intensity, and also training load. So maybe Andrew,
Mm,
you want to continue on that where you stopped.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe if we can bring that chart back up, then I can speak a little bit about that. But what we do in the professional teams, like in Mitchell and Scott, is we use Training Peaks to monitor the riders, and every day after a training session or after a race, when your Wi-Fi is working, not like mine, it actually automatically updates your training rides straight from your device up to the Training Peaks platform, and it gives you an overview of. You can look into specific workouts, but you can also look at an overview on the dashboard, like an example that we've got here. So basically, what we're showing you is the power profile is the purple curve at the top left, and that just is a regression curve. So I spoke before that we can use a 20 minutes or an 8 minute, and there's an algorithm in this that helps you to use different time periods to actually do the FTP test. But this is something that we would do to monitor riders' progression just generally over the course of a season, and we can also see what their heart rate would be over different time periods and determine training zones from that. And similarly, we can see how much time they've spent in different training zones. So Adrian, I don't know if we've shown that colored chart to the viewers out there, but that's basically your training zones from 1 to 5, and we can see how much time they've spent, and we can, you can monitor that yourself, or you can have a coach to help you to do that, and we can see how you fit in with Adrian's 70-20-10 rule as well. So yeah, there's different ways to do it, and I think Training Peaks also helps us because it gives you the capacity to actually determine your training zones automatically. All you need to do is enter your threshold heart rate or your FTP value, and it gives it to you automatically. So that's a very valuable modern tool that a lot of teams and a lot of riders use.
Sounds interesting. So just now you were mentioning that Adrian was probably supposed to share like on this relative perceived exertion. So just wondering, like how do you know what is like a perceived exertion? Maybe you can share with us on that.
Okay, maybe if we can get that chart, that colored chart up, and then we can just show the viewers that it's basically starting from active recovery, which is really easy. So if you look in the left-hand column, there's a description, and all the way on the right hand, that's what you would be feeling. So Adrian, you want to go into a bit more detail in that?
Yep. So for active recovery, right, we are looking at about 55 or less percentage of your FTP. Remember, Jiayan, we spoke about the FTP, how you calculate it. So now is the time to see how all these things fit into the whole jigsaw puzzle. So active recovery, we are looking at 55, no more than 55% of the FTP number. Functional threshold heart rate, FTHR, that's what it stands for. We are looking at about 68% or less. So as what Andrew mentioned before, the entire duration of your 20 minutes or the 2 sets of 8 minutes, the average heart rate, we can consider that as your functional threshold heart rate. So you don't want it to be more than 68%. It is active recovery. And RPE, normally we use a gauge of 1:10. 1 meaning like, super easy. 10 meaning like super, super hard, you almost cannot complete it anymore. Okay, you give yourself a rating of 2 or less, and the sensation you should feel easy. Okay, so for endurance, we are looking at 56 to 75% of your FTP, 69 to 83% of your functional threshold heart rate, and you give yourself a rate of perceived exertion of between 3 to 5. So sensation should be somewhat comfortable. Okay, so you're still able to speak. So, this is the joke. Sometimes when we go out on group ride, we say, today we are going easy, but after 10 minutes, you can't even talk. Okay, so that is not easy at all. Okay, so if it's easy, you are able to still have some proper conversation. It cannot be like, then your friend is kidding you. They are not going easy at all. They're just hammering the pace. So for moderate, you are looking at somewhere between 76 to 90% of your FTP and 84 to 94% of your functional threshold heart rate and 5 to 6 perceived exertion. And you are looking in terms of sensation, you are slightly strained, harder to speak. You are still in control of the situation, but you realize that you can no longer speak fully and you need to focus. Yeah. Okay. For intense, okay, if you're looking at the orange bar now, you're looking at 91 to 105% of your FTP. Okay. Anywhere between 95 to 105% of your functional threshold heart rate and a perceived exertion of 7 to 8. Now, this is hard. Okay, but it's still sustainable, meaning you really got to dig in, but you feel that you can still control your pedal stroke. It's not like going out of hand, like you totally lose control, you cannot pedal at all. You're still in control, but it is really hard now. Okay, for the heart intensity, which is the red color column, you're looking at 106% of your FTP, okay, and 106% of your functional threshold heart rate. You are looking at a perceived exertion of about 8. Okay, this is basically a hard workout, which means if you really go, maximum I would think you will last for about 6 to 8 minutes, somewhere around that duration. It is really a hard effort. Okay, if you feel that you can last more than 8 minutes, you can go at 10, 15, and 20. That wouldn't be hard anymore. It would be somewhere around intense or moderate. Okay, so these are just some of the guidelines. Later on, as we speak about your weekly schedule, you will see how we actually distribute all this intensity to the weekly schedule, whereby so that you don't overtrain yourself and you get enough recovery.
I see. So is there probably you will be sharing a weekly schedule showing when is this supposed to be green in color?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to know more about that because we only briefly touched previously on this 70-20-10 rule that you have. So it's like 70% easy. If I didn't remember it wrongly, 70% easy, 10% moderate, and then
20% hard. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I would like to know how let's say because there's this person that actually had this question, meaning if I have only 10 hours of training, so how do I chart it out in this manner?
Yeah. So maybe if we can flash the chart there. Yeah. So this chart actually what we did is we color coded so that it reflects upon the intensity chart that we spoke about previously. So if we got 10 hours, right? What we do is that we spend about 2 hours in the hard zone. Okay, so as you can see, Monday and Thursday, they are red coded. They are considered hard, meaning they are about easily more than 106% more than your FTP. Okay, on Tuesday and Friday, we are looking at your recovery, right? We are looking at about 55% or less of your FTP. Okay, and then on Saturday, we are looking at 1 hour at your moderate, right? Okay, which is about 76 to 105% of your FTP. And for Sunday, we are looking at 56 to 75% of FTP, which is your easy ride. Now, if you are really time strapped for time, my advice to you is to make sure that you don't skip the green and the yellow code. There is time for everything, but most importantly is to build yourself the foundation. So by going at a steady state pace, your body actually got enough time to actually adapt and make physiological changes in 4 to 6 weeks. Okay, don't rush into it by wanting to do the intervals first, because without a baseline fitness, it will not be able to hold on to your intervals. It will give you a false hope, meaning you've on that day, maybe after doing a Monday and Thursday, you felt good. But if you skip your long ride, it's the matter of fact time where you start to feel that you could not hold the intervals anymore. So the baseline fitness is very important. So never sacrifice the green and the yellow code for the red. Always make sure that there's enough time spent on the green and yellow. That's why we allocate at least 70% of the time, okay, on it. And then 20% is the interval. Intervals are icing of the cake. Just remember the red and the orange. Yeah, and then when you are going into the race, most likely you will spend the zone on your Saturday, which is your orange code, which is your moderate. You're looking at somewhere between 76 to 105% of FTP. Okay, so if you are a fit guy, you should be able to race pretty well within 76 to 105% of your FTP.
I see. Now that you mentioned about cake, I probably couldn't concentrate, but I think it's a good analogy right there. So just wondering, because I'm looking at this sample weekly schedule, just thinking in the point of view as an athlete, I know we need to switch it up, but let's say if I really want to this is probably the golden question for this session, and is that if I would like to really improve my level of performance, does sticking to this 10-hour rule or 70-20-10 help me with that?
Yeah, so Jayan, I think that's a good point. So what we need to remember, what we need to think about is that what we're speaking about today is progression. So first of all, if we are always going to train in the same way, the same amount of hours, the same intensity, we won't improve, and there'll be a plateau in our performance, and that's important to remember. So we need to find ways that we can effectively manipulate our training intensity and our training volume. So, like I said in the beginning of the broadcast, is that we have a training load. So our training load is how much training we're doing, and that's made up by a combination of intensity and volume. So in other words, how hard am I training and how much am I training? So in order to progress, in order to lift the level, to get stronger, we need to change that. So we need to basically manipulate either the volume or the intensity. And I would say if you're thinking about doing an event, like a race or something, the closer you get to the event, the lower your volume will get and the higher your intensity. And eventually you need a period of recovery. So what we speak about is overload. So I said training load before. So now we're speaking about overload. So you're actually loading the body with more training, more stress than we normally would have. And then there's another principle that comes with that, which is called supercompensation. So I have some graphics prepared that we can show the viewers out there, just to show the differences and how it actually works. So the first one that I've got here is it's basically what you would experience. If you look at the red line on the screen, that's basically what you'd experience if you're training the same volume, the same intensity all the time. There's no change in the performance. Performance just stays the same. So that's what we say. There's a plateau. Very little variation in the performance. The next one is what we want to see. That is actually if we can get the next one onto the screen, then we've got definitely a difference in intensity. So what you'd see here is in the center, there's a little section called taper, and taper just basically means recovery. So you start with normal training and then you progress onto a taper. So what's happening in the taper, in the recovery period, is that the rider is actually preparing themselves for overload and for a hard period of training that lies ahead. So you're recovering, the body is ready, and you go into that overload training period ready and recovered, and you can train as hard as you are required. But what happens during the overload is that the red line actually declines. So we need to remember that our performance actually declines. We don't get stronger during these periods of high intensity training. We're actually stressing the body. And before you get stronger, you need another period of recovery. So you'll see there's another taper at the end. And then you'll see the red line actually goes up. So that means our performance has increased. You're stronger. You're able to set personal bests. That's what we want to see. And this principle is called supercompensation, and it's all part of what we call periodization in coaching. And you can time this according to your event. So the last one I want to show you is also very important, is the same principle. The rider is training normally, he has a taper, but the overload is possibly too hard, and the taper at the end, or the recovery at the end, is probably not enough, and then you just end up where you were before. So yeah, that's not exactly what we want to perceive. Getting the balance between recovery and training right is really important. And also what's worse than this even is if you imagine that red line just continues to go down. So what a lot of riders do is they just go out and they train hard every single day, and eventually the stress that they're putting on their bodies just causes them to overtrain. We call that overtraining syndrome. and there's no, they just get fatigued, and eventually people burn out, they stop riding, they lose interest. So that's really important to remember. So yes, Adrian has a good point with his 70-20-10 rule, and I think in general, if you that's a very good rule to follow, but we need to manipulate it and change it at certain times in order to have a progression. And what we need to also keep in mind is that you might have a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks where you're training at a much higher intensity. Maybe your 70-20-10 ratio will be different. You'll be doing much higher intensity than that ratio, but then you need a week or two to recover and actually get that ratio back down to closer to where Adrian has it.
I see. Actually, when you talk about, overtraining and, not having enough rest, I think it kind of hits home for me. Like back in probably when I was in junior college and I was training probably 7 days a week, nearing the competition period, and I just can't seem to improve in my performance. So there's this saying that I think probably when you're younger, you just never listen to your coach, and that is, resting is part of training. So to me, back then, it was something that I did not believe in. So now that you say it, I think it's something that probably athletes of other sports, not only just cyclists, that they can actually take this into account when they plan for their trainings.
Absolutely. And I think recovery and resting is something completely in its own, and we'll have a session later on that we can speak much more about the details of recovery and resting. Yeah.
Great, awesome. So anyway, I've been looking at the comment section. So yes, we have Darren. Hi, Darren. Hi, Roger. There are some questions right here. So just wondering, any one of you want to go first? I think let's start with the first question. So we have a question from Shang Yanxi. Hi there. So what do you pay attention to when you analyze your riders' data?
From my side, I think it's just about consistency. One of the most important things is that rider just train consistently, and you don't want riders to train really hard and then 1 week that they're not really following the program. So that's probably the first thing that I would look at. And yeah, like you said, recovery is really important. One of the things that I also look for is that not only that the training is done properly, but also that you recover, and that recovery days are actually recovery days, and that riders don't go too hard on those days.
Okay. Any
Adrian,
input
what
from
do you
you,
think?
Adrian?
Yeah. So for us in the national team, maybe if you can flash the 70-20-10 chart again, that 3 chart, if it's possible. So yeah, maybe we wait for the flash. Yeah. So what we do is the same as just what Andrew has discussed. So what we want. What do we normally monitor back here is that we make sure that the athlete doesn't overdo it. So we make sure that in a week, okay, all of them has a power meter and a bike computer, and they load it up into the computer, and TrainingPeaks kind of sum up their effort. So at the end of the day, same thing, 70% of the time we want the third bar, which is the third chart where the blue is really at the top. Okay, and then the 20%, which is the gray color column, it's really hard. The hard is really hard. Okay, and then the orange bar is really kept low. So in a week, I will always monitor and make sure that the athletes' training is polarized in the sense that they are not cooking themselves. They are actually maintaining the 70-20-10 rule. And of course, it depends on the situation, as what Andrew mentioned. If it's closer to the race, then the volume will kind of change. Okay, and then the intensity will increase by a bit. So this is some of the simple data that we see. So those bar that you just saw, right, is basically percentage of their FTP that they spend in. So this is what we look at.
I see. Interesting. We hope we have answered your question, Yancy. So let's move on to the next question by Elvina. Hi, Elvina. So the question is, apart from cycling for active recovery, what other forms of workout would you recommend? And how many times per week would you recommend an intense ride? I think it's something that we have briefly mention. So it's probably Adrian can take up this question.
Yeah, so apart from cycling for active recovery, I think you can do other sports as well, right? I mean, you can do, instead of just cycling, maybe do a basketball, if it's your off season, if there's no race, a sport that requires you to still run, and just keep your heartbeat going, something simple, nothing complex. I mean, swimming is a good form of exercise as well, swimming. Running is pretty good as well. So just be careful, if you haven't been running for a very long time, because it's a load bearing sport, just be careful of how long you run. Because you must be careful of, as we grow older, we want to be careful of our structural support, which is your skeletal muscle. As you run more and more, you grow stronger. So if you have been laying it off, especially cycling, because it's non-load bearing, you got to be careful of the volume. But if not, I think swimming, running, soccer, netball, Jiayan, your dragon boat, I think is also a good training
Yes.
activity. Yeah, and maybe Andrew's skiing in Switzerland.
There's a lot of types right there. I hope Elvina gets to try skiing one day. One day we can get to go and travel again.
Andrew, do you ski, Andrew?
Very badly, but I do sometimes.
I've never tried it before, but
I think a good active recovery is also just hiking. We have really nice hiking trails and walks here in the mountains, and that's, if you're not used to running, like Adrian said, it's really important to protect your body and make sure that if you're not used to running, and I've seen so many cyclists get injured just doing silly things like running or playing football, like you've said. So that's just, it's the load bearing is fairly low. The impact isn't that high, but it still has that
kind of effect on your
and effect. And it's nice and relaxing because you're out in nature and there's not a lot of stress. So I think that's also something that's nice to do. But swimming, like you said, also, and there's some benefits to swimming as well, like building lung capacity and breathing and all sorts of things like that. So yeah, that's a really good one.
Okay, yeah. So I hope we have answered your question, Elvina. And then now I'm looking at the next question, which I think is, we have a question from Darren. So hi, Darren. So his question is, would there be benefits of using muscle oxygenation like the human hacks on top of power and HR during training? So sounds like your kind of question, Andrew. do you
Adrian, I don't actually know what is a human hex, but I would say, we do so much. Cycling is specifically, we and cyclists, we get so fascinated by numbers and by statistics and all sorts of things, and you often get riders getting involved in cycling, and they get so focused on their FTP and their power, and they just stare at the Garmin on their stem all day, and very soon they lose interest in cycling. So I would say, it might be a case of paralysis through analysis and over analyzing things. So just try and keep it simple and use the resources that we have, like heart rate and power, and try not to get too complicated in the way that you do things. Even when you're using power and heart rate, sometimes you just need to go out and ride and enjoy it, and not to be too focused on the numbers. So yeah.
Yeah, so just to add on to Andrew, I think the key thing here is patience and time. Let time takes its toll to actually bring your body up. And I think whatever extra stuff that we want to do as a stimulant to the body, I mean, we can take it, but just for experimental, but don't have to look into it too hard. As the main thing is still giving the body enough time to adapt and being consistent and doing it routinely and making sure that you don't get injured. I think that's the most important of it all. Yeah.
Yeah. Hope we have answered your question, Darren. So we have another question from Freddie. Hi, Freddie. This question is, this is a good training of spread out for the week. I think it's more about the schedule that you were sharing earlier just now, Adrian. So I think, but how can we plan for riders who rides about 5 hours on weekends and maybe 2 hours during weekday? 2 times 5, 10. 10 plus
7
15?
hours a week.
Yeah.
5 hours on weekend and maybe 2 hours during a weekday. So I think it's looking at about 7 hours a week of training.
Okay.
If I'm not wrong, Freddie, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. But yeah, so as I mentioned before, 5 hours you want to do it at your easy or endurance pace, right? So you are looking at somewhere around a certain percentage of your FTP. I think around 50, 55 or 70, somewhere around that ballpark of your FTP. And then the 2 hours, what you can do is you spread it out to 1 hour of hard and 1 hour of moderate. Or you can do 1 hour of hard activity. So maybe if you can flash back that color code chart again, the weekly 10 hours with color code. Yeah, thank you, moderator. So yeah, Freddie. So basically on Sunday, you can do your 5 hours at 56 to 75% of FTP. And then the remainder of the week, you can spend maybe 1 hour doing the 8 sets of 3-minute hard, 2-minute easy. And then the remainder 1 hour, you can do it on your moderate intervals. Or you can choose to do 2 red and 1 yellow. As I say, don't ever skip your yellow. It's very important. So you want to spend more time on it. This chart is actually a polarized chart model, meaning it varies your intensity in a week so that your body gets enough to adapt. As Andrew has mentioned before, you don't want to do over the same intensity week in, week out. Your body needs stimulant as it gradually increase. But also don't fall into the trap of being too over enthusiastic. Maybe if you want to increase a bit of maybe 1 rep or maybe a slightly higher intensity, wait for at least about the third week. Okay, your body takes about 4 to 6 weeks to adapt. So you are looking at maybe 2 cycles or 4 weeks. And then on the third week, you add maybe a bit of a duration or intensity. Yeah, but don't do all together at the same time because that's I don't want to go over that red line where it start dipping.
Okay. All right. I hope we have answered your question, Freddie. And now we'll move on to the last question. I think it's specifically for you, Adrian, since he noticed your nice haircut today. So we have a question from Boon Ko. So the question is, can you explain what are LT1, LT2 polarized training model, the dark hole? A coach I used to work with used to go on and on about it. So any idea what is he talking about? It seems like your friend.
Yeah, Boon Kiat used to be our ex-national cyclist. Sorry, I shouldn't use the word ex. Yeah, next year is SEA Games year, so maybe he should come back. So back in our last year where we were training, so back in those time where we are training for 2017 SEA Games, we kind of do a lactic test in the lab. I mean, Andrew should be very familiar. So we actually figure out what is the person's lactic 1 and lactic 2. So it's a bit like the moderate zone whereby you got your lower end and your higher end. Remember that chart that we have? Yeah. So basically, maybe if you can flash that colored intensity chart again, and then I can use Boon Kiat's description and fit it into that chart. Yeah. So LT1 and LT2. Okay, of course, you cannot take it literally, but this is just a rough guide. Your lactic 1, you are looking at maybe the lower end of your moderate zone, which is the beige color. And then higher end of your lactic 2, you're looking at your intense, which is about 91 to 105% of your FTP. So regards to the dark hole, what you don't want to be is to spend too much time in a moderate zone. So you remember I say every week we want to spend only 10% at your moderate or intense zone. Because if you spend too much time in this zone, as Andrew mentioned, you will start to see the red line decline. This is where what a scientific term, we call it a dark hole. This is where you start to feel the overtraining effect. Okay, so that's why if you follow the model carefully of a 70-20-10 rule and your hard be hard, your easy be easy, you should be well taken care and not be too close to the dark hole. You should be quite well varied. Okay, and that's where the polarized model, as we share to you on the schedule, is important to vary and hard be hard, easy be easy. So that kind of answer Boon Kiat's question of the dark hole and where lactic 1 and lactic 2, what is it all about? Yeah.
I see. Well, we hope we have answered your question, Bunget. So yeah, I think maybe I'll let Adrian share with you on how he got his haircut next time. So the next question we have, I think is the last question that we have, is from Roger, and is that how is FTP measure different from critical power?
Woohoo.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's not really a difference in how it's measured, actually. So it's just a definition that really changes. So critical power is the mean maximum power that you can sustain for a certain period of time. So you can have critical power for 5 minutes, might be 300 watts, for example, and that's the maximum power that a rider can sustain for a given period of time. So the different protocols to determine critical power. And then FTP is basically what Adrian has explained before, which is functional threshold power, which is generally determined by doing a 20-minute test and taking 95% of that. So functional threshold power is a theoretical threshold. So that kind of equates more or less to the lactate threshold that Adrian was just speaking about in the previous question. So how it's measured is more or less the same, but it's just a definition that sort of differs.
I see. Yep, I hope we answered your question, Roger. So now that we have addressed all the comments, maybe Adrian, you would like to share on what will the next episode be about?
Yep. So the next stream, we will be talking about maintenance. So what are some of the stuff that we do? You know, for example, Andrew, what he does with Michigan Scott, and what we do in the national team. What strategies we use to maintain the fitness. So this week, right, we are talking about progressive. How do we progress? You know, as we go by in terms of fitness. Next thing, what we want to do is to find out strategies that we can prolong our fitness so that we can enjoy. You know. I mean, every one of us want to be fit, right? So we will share about, you know, what are our regular practices and routine. So stay tuned.
Seems really exciting. We hope the viewers are excited to tune in to hear from what you both have to share in the upcoming episode. And if you have any questions on what Adrian has mentioned about earlier on maintenance of fitness, do leave them in the comments and we'll take it up in the next episode. So to wrap up with all these tips and tricks shared by Adrian and Andrew, we hope that it has given you some insights on how to better plan your training going forward. Hope everyone enjoyed this live stream with us. And before you go, make sure to like and follow ProCyclingSG on social media at the following handles you see below. And share this video with your family and friends, regardless of whether they are beginner or seasoned cyclists. So thanks again for joining us today. Stay safe and stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.